If you make cold calls, you're probably used to getting hung up on, rejected, people having no interest in what you're saying, and finding it impossible to book meetings. And I know exactly how you feel because I started my career cold calling, trying to book appointments. But over the past decade, I've tracked this cold call script almost 4 million times, and it has nearly a 10% average booking rate. In this video, I'm gonna share with you how to run a cold call, the 4 phases of a cold call, and I'm gonna give you the script that we use so you're never lost. The first thing we're gonna go over here is how to run a cold call, because the majority of people who make cold calls are lost before they've even picked up the phone. When I was an SDR cold calling into salons and spas, at one point there was a really popular script where people would just ask for the meeting in the very beginning. They'd say, hey, this is what we do. Would you like to book a meeting? And it spread like wildfire because it was pretty nice. You're just asking for a meeting and sometimes you'd get lucky and book the meeting. But there were a ton of problems with that. People wouldn't show up to the meetings. You got rejected a lot more than you didn't, but since it was so fast, it didn't feel as bad. And probably the worst part is it made it nearly impossible to hit our quota because we couldn't convert as many people as we needed to hit the number that we had to hit. So there's 3 things I want to make sure that you're really aware of that as concepts when it comes to running a cold call. The first is your objective is not to book a meeting. Get that completely out of your head. The objective in the beginning of a cold call is to find a problem that you can solve. If you can find a problem and show that you're a solution to that problem, and that problem has impact, then they will book a meeting. You just need to find that problem first. The next is you need to build interest in a solution to that problem. You don't need to convince them that you're the right solution. You don't need to tell them all of the cool things that you do so that they're all excited and they want to buy, or they don't. You just need to generate interest enough to get them to set a time to evaluate the solution further. And finally, you need to book a meeting. And that's one of the most important parts. Some folks, they get so wrapped up in the conversation on a cold call that they forget that they still need to book a meeting at the end of the day. So make sure that after you've identified a problem, built interest in a solution to that problem, that you actually book a meeting and don't talk your way out of it. Which brings us to the second thing we're going to talk about here, which are the 4 phases of a cold call, or maybe more specifically, the 4 phases that the prospect goes through when you are cold calling them. Quick story on how I got this. I used to play competitive tabletop games, and I used to travel all over the country. There'd be tournaments of thousands of people, and I would compete. And I hit a wall in my own performance where I couldn't get past a certain level. And I had a couple of really good friends of mine who were much better than me, who finally opened my eyes. When you're playing strategy card games, which is the nerdiest thing ever, by the way, when you're playing these strategy card games, there's something you need to understand. The opponent has a plan. You have a plan. And throughout the game, there are different phases. Sometimes your opponent is going to be more of the aggressor. Sometimes they're going to be less of the aggressor. Sometimes you need to be aggressive in response to them. Sometimes you need to be less aggressive in your play style. So there's these dynamics that are taking place. And in a cold call, it happens exactly the same way, but the vast majority of people who cold call have no idea that these are going on. And there are 4 phases that you need to be aware of, and they go in order. The first phase is go away. The prospect just wants to get you off of the phone. And it's critical to understand that this phase exists because so many people who cold call try pitching right in the very beginning while the person they're talking to is in the go away phase. They're trying to get you off the phone. They might book a meeting and not show up to it just to get you off the phone. They might just hang up on you. They might just say, oh no, and throw a bunch of objections. And if you're not behaving appropriately, which we'll talk about a little bit when we go through the script, if you're not behaving appropriately when they're in that go away phase, then you have a higher chance of losing that person. So the go away phase, you need to realize that it's really a phase where your objective is to get to the very next phase, which is I'll talk. That's the second phase. So they start off as go away. You use your words, which we'll go over in the script. You use your words to get them to I'll talk. Once they're in I'll talk, we're trying to get them into the 3rd phase, which is I'm interested. Now, that is critical because just because someone talks to you doesn't mean they're going to book a meeting. But an interested person is way more likely to book a meeting. So when you have someone who's willing to talk to you, you want to get them interested in what you're talking about, a solution to their problem. And that takes us to the final phase, which is I'll meet. They'll actually sit down and meet with you to evaluate a solution to a problem that you've just been talking to them about solving. And that is so important, because if you spend too much time and not interested and just tell them everything about the product, they will make a buying decision before ever seeing the product. So you want to make sure that from not interested, you're getting them to I'll meet. You're leveraging just enough curiosity to get a meeting on the calendar. So those are the 4 phases that you're going through, which brings us to the third thing we're going to go over, which is the script that you can use to navigate all of this. So this is a script that I've been refining for over a decade. So let's dive right into it. Let's start with the introduction to the cold call. There's a lot of ways that you can do this. Here's how I do it. I generally start off with saying, hey, this is Kyle from company name. How's it going? Now, there's a lot of debate whether you should start a cold call with how are you or not how are you. In my experience, it has had no impact on my conversion rates, and it's how I talk, so I keep it in there. If you find that people are hanging up on you really quickly, then you're gonna wanna cut that part of it out. Which leads us to the next part of the intro, which is the permission-based introduction. This is when you ask permission to actually have a conversation with them, and this is what it sounds like. I'm not sure if we can help each other, but I thought it was worth a quick call. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions and let you decide if we should chat? It's very simple, and why I like it so much is because it gives us a lot of return on the words that we're saying. What I mean by that is I almost view cold calling like I'm using my words to buy myself time. And when I ask for permission, I get a lot of time in exchange for those words, so I like to do it. There's other ways of doing this, like, hey, do you mind if I take 30 seconds to tell you why I'm calling? I don't like those as much because I feel like it puts you down a peg when it comes to authority, and on cold calls, it's very important to have strong tone and strong authority. So now let's put these together and add a little words to it to make it smoother, and this is what I would recommend that you say when you're starting your cold calls. Hey, my name's Kyle, I'm calling from company. How's it going? Good, that's great to hear. So the purpose of my call is we help type of company solve this problem. I'm not sure if we can help each other. I thought it was worth a quick call here. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions and let you decide if we should chat? The reason why this works is because it's giving the prospect control of the conversation, or really the illusion of control, because we're going to maintain control of the whole conversation moving forward. But the prospect feels in control. It's very polite, and a lot of people are willing to give you the time. So of course, when you say this, you may encounter what I call a brush off. This is an objection early on in the call where they're saying that they don't want to talk to you, they're trying to get off the phone. These are things like not interested, I'm about to hop in a meeting, send me an email. These are all what I call brush offs. And there's a very simple framework for overcoming a brush off, and it's called the AAA. I learned this when I was an SDR cold calling. It's acknowledge, answer, and ask. You acknowledge what they told you, you answer their underlying concern, and then you ask them a question to regain control of the conversation. So here's what it might sound like. If somebody says not interested, I would say, hey, I hear you. I totally call you out of the blue here. Let me let you go. Before I do, just a quick question here. And then you ask a question to continue the conversation. It might be the permission-based opener where someone gives you a brush off, you acknowledge, you answer, and then you say, I'm not sure if we can help each other. I thought it was worth a quick call. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions and let you decide if we should chat? That would totally be a good place for this. If you'd already said that and they're giving you the brush off, then you want to move on to the next part of it, which is going to be your golden question, which we'll get to in a minute here. Now, another very common brush off is send me an email. This is actually my favorite one to address because I have a very structured approach that actually leverages the brush off to continue the conversation. Here's what it sounds like. If somebody tells you to send them an email, this is what you're gonna wanna reply with. All right, I'm happy to send you an email. What's the best email for you? Get their email. Okay, perfect. I wanna make sure what I send you is very relevant. Give me an idea here and then go into your golden question, which we're gonna go over right now. The reason why the AAA works so well is because you show that you're listening, you're giving them the feeling that you're letting them off the hook, right? You're saying, hey, I'll send you an email, I'll let you go here, and then you're regaining control of the conversation by asking them a question. One of the important things that you use is what I call the golden question, and there's 2 ways to ask this, but this really sets the context for the rest of the cold call. Option 1 is typically we help type of company who are focused on improving problem they typically have, or they are focused on a different problem that they typically have. I'm curious, which one of these resonates with you most? The reason why this one's effective is because you're giving them two problems that they could possibly be experiencing to give them context around the conversation and also letting them select which one is actually more top of mind for them. This means that whatever you talk about next is going to be relevant to them because you've already identified that there's a challenge that they're trying to solve. Now the next option here, option 2, and the one that I generally use the most, is more of a struggle-based way of structuring this golden question. It goes like this. I speak with a lot of title and they tend to struggle with one of two things. Struggle 1 or struggle 2. I'm curious, which one of these resonates with you most? The reason why I like this one a little bit better is because I think speaking to the persona by using their title is a little bit stronger than speaking to the type of company. And I want to speak directly to the person that I'm talking to. Now, the next part of this, after you've asked your golden question, is to have a conversation with somebody. And I don't script the entire conversation. I use more of a framework that leaves it more open-ended for us to have a back and forth with the prospect to better understand their challenge and the impact of that challenge. Here's what it sounds like. The first part is you're going to ask why they selected one of the options that they selected, and this is what that would sound like. Why does that one resonate most with you? Now they're going to respond to that and tell you, well, we're dealing with X or dealing with Y. It's your job at this part of the conversation to follow this framework to navigate the conversation. The first part of it is understand their current state. How are they doing things today? You can ask questions like, what's your current process for solving X? What is going on because that's a problem? How is that problem impacting you today? The next thing you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna understand their ideal state. So what would you like it to look like? What result would you hope to see? By solving that problem, what would you expect in the future? And the real key here is to try and quantify it. So if you can get a number that they're at today and a number that they're trying to get to, that's the most powerful. So let's say your solution helps them get more patients to come to their chiropractic clinic. You would ask them, how many patient visits are you doing per week today? What is capacity for you? Or how many would you like to be seeing? And then that way you have a gap. So let's say they say, we're doing 50 a week right now, we should really be doing 75. Now we know that they want to get another 25 appointments per week. And you can ask them, what are you currently doing to get that? What challenges have you run into trying to increase patient visits by 25 per week? That's why it's so effective, because you can actually put some numbers around it, which starts to quantify in their mind the impact of having an additional 25 patients per week in this example. And the final part of this framework is really understanding what they are doing to try and solve the problem today. Remember, their current state isn't where they want it to be. So whatever they're doing isn't working all that well. So by understanding what they're currently doing, you achieve two things. One, you understand the effort they're putting in, which tells you how important the problem is, but you're also highlighting the things that they're doing that aren't working as well as they would like them to. So you can ask questions like, what have you tried to improve this? What are you currently doing to solve this? How do you think you could solve this? All of these questions will help give you context into where their head's at when it comes to solving this problem, which is going to strengthen the need for a solution to that problem. That leads us to the last section of our script, which is called the recap. The purpose of the recap is to make the next step such a no-brainer that it's very natural that they would book it. The key is when the prospect starts asking you a bunch of questions on how you can help solve the problem, you don't answer a bunch of them. The first time they ask you a question on how you help, you will move into the transition. You might answer their question with a yes or a no if it's a yes or no question, but you need to transition into a recap because now they're interested. And because they're interested, they're gonna want to learn more about how you could possibly help. And if you tell them on the cold call, they're not gonna want to meet. So you wanna make sure you do not tell them too much on the cold call and instead book an appointment so you can actually walk them through how you can help them solve their problem. Let's go through the recap and I'll explain to you why it works. Thanks for filling me in, Name. From what I heard, you're trying what they told you that they were trying to get whichever topic resonated with them. Why don't we do this? Let's set up some time to have a conversation about the topic of the next step that will help you get from gap that you found earlier in the script. How does tomorrow at time work for you? and you're giving them a time. Here's why it works. The recap in the very beginning shows them that you are listening. So to use our chiropractic example, it might sound like this. Thanks for filling me in, Jason. From what I heard, you're trying to do more marketing and get patients to come back more regularly to increase the amount of patients visits that you're getting. Why don't we do this? Let's set up a time to have a conversation about how we've helped other chiropractors get from 50 appointments per week to 75. How does tomorrow at 3 o'clock work for you? Now, we recapped, showed that we were listening, restated the gap, which is really the value that they're going to be getting by using a solution like ours. But then we do something really powerful. We say, why don't we do this? This is such a natural, calm way of transitioning to ask for a next step. And because it comes across so authentic and reasonable, it makes the decision very easy to say yes to the next step. But we take it a step further. So we say, just to repeat here, why don't we do this? Let's set up some time to have a conversation about the topic of the next step that will help you get from gap from earlier in the script. How does tomorrow at 3 o'clock work for you? That's giving them a time. It's very assumptive. It's not, do you want to meet? Right? It's very assumptive, a little bit more aggressive. But since we softened it with why don't we do this, and then we give them a firm time, those two things work really well together, and you're a lot more likely to get somebody to agree to the next step because you're making it very easy for them to do so. So this was how to successfully run a cold call, but you want to know what's more important than the words that you say? It's how you say them. So if you want to learn how to speak with authority, check out this video right here.